And okay, guys, welcome back. It is back, and I'm glad to be back. And it's been a while since we did our last landlord webinar, and not because we don't think that you didn't get any great value from them, or that we didn't want to run them. But I honestly think that between things calming down just a little bit in respect to the amount of new news that was unfolding every day with respect to COVID, but also because I just think that we were all suffering a little bit of Zoom fatigue. We decided to give them a little bit of rest. But thank you for joining us tonight. We are back. We're glad to be back and giving you overwhelming feedback from all of you, our clients and our landlords. These are something that we plan on continuing to run, maybe even monthly, well past COVID, or fingers crossed, COVID finishing up. So. But we certainly think that these are still super important at the moment, because there are a few things on the horizon and some COVID related situations that we wanted to get you all up to speed with. So again, thanks for joining us tonight. So before we get stuck into the information and the topics that we want to run through, and while we wait for a few more people still to log on, I'll just go through a couple of introductions and also a little bit of housekeeping. So I'll get our panelists to unmute very shortly, but you will see we have our entire team in on the session this evening. And for many of you, these incredible people are just names on the bottom of an email, sadly, or just over the phone. And so quickly, let's do a bit of a run around. And first of all, Zoe, how are you going?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Pete. I just want to say a big shout out to all my landlords. Everyone's been really amazing this last few months. Everything's been pretty tough, but yeah, everyone's been really understanding and supportive, which is great.
Fantastic. And we've also got Alicia with us. Now, Alicia, you're working predominantly in our Druin office. How's the market down there?
It's pretty good at the moment. We're receiving quite a few inquiries and applications from prospective tenants, but we're finding overall we have a shortage of properties at the moment. So struggling with that one at the moment.
Thanks, Alicia. And Carla, you along with Zoe manage one of our largest portfolios. So tell us a little bit, how are tenants holding up at the moment?
Yeah, our tenants have been really great. They've been really good with communicating with us if they're having any issues with rent or anything like that. And we haven't received any new financial hardship forms, which is amazing.
It is amazing. We're talking to some friends of ours through OBrien Real Estate down in Blackburn. Poor the Molinaros down there have been struggling in a very different way to us. So fingers crossed to our landlords. At the moment, we've had no new hardship forms, which is great. And Brett is with us tonight as well. Brett, rental demand. Tell us a little bit about the amount of inquiry at the moment coming through. And you're based in our Warragul office, but just overall the inquiry rates.
So similar to Alicia, well, very similar to Alicia, in Warragul, we're experiencing a really high demand for rental properties, with a lot of tenants actually missing out on securing a home just due to the shortage of things we have available for rent at the minute.
Yeah, demands are very high. Thanks, Brett. And Gabby, maintenance has been a little bit of an issue recently due to the inability for tradespeople to work properly. How are we going? Is this under control? Are we getting back to a normal or a COVID normal?
Yeah, so we're still receiving more maintenance requests than normal. However, it's not as high as we were seeing a few months ago. So yeah, it's been pretty good.
Excellent. And of course, we do have Kirsty with us, our head of department as well. But Kirsty is going to do the majority of the talking tonight. So I'll let her off the hook for the moment. We'll come back to you very shortly. Guys, now, while I make sure everyone has logged on, and we're a few minutes past 6, so we'll get cooking very shortly. Just a couple of quick housekeeping things. For the first time joiners tonight, if you do have any questions, you should see at the bottom of your screen a little Q&A section. Feel free to put any questions that you may have in there. If we do have time at the end of the night, if this hasn't dragged out, we'll be sure to answer those. If we don't answer them all, we will come back and answer them via email for you. Now, we have created these events to host our own landlords, but given these times, we have opened it up to a few other investors and private landlords out there who could also use some help. So if you are not one of our landlords, first of all, welcome along tonight. But it is great to have you here, but please be aware the information that we provide, although it's fairly generally relevant to the industry, our handling or our procedures is often quite specific to us. So just bear that in mind. Of course, these opinions are based, or the opinions that we have based throughout this webinar are ours only. We do acknowledge that no two situations are the same, and we would encourage each of you to chat with your property manager and other key stakeholders regarding your property and your situation specifically. And of course, finally, the little out clause, but we are not financial advisors. We're not financial planners or solicitors, and we're not qualified to give financial or legal advice. Now, I don't think we'll be going down any of those roads today, but these are opinions only, and for any financial or legal advice, you do need to seek a professional in that field. So, without any further ado, we're 6:05. Let's get cooking on tonight's evening, and I'm going to make sure that Kirsty is mic'd up and ready to go, because the majority of conversations, as I said, will involve her expertise. Kirsty is our head of department, and I'm going to call on her very shortly. But tonight, guys, we're going to try and talk mainly about two main things that we think are really important for you to get your head around a little bit. One of those is around VCAT. There has been some rather interesting things happening around VCAT at the moment. There's some major backlogs for starters. Kirsty will go into detail on that. And we are, and all around that, we are experiencing a lot of difficulties when it comes to VCAT hearings. So for those of you who do have applications at VCAT, but just importantly for those of you who don't, we want to make sure that you are aware of what is happening in that space. So we will get to that shortly. But first of all, we want to discuss what I'm calling a bit of colliding of two worlds at the moment, and it's a bit average, and our team are very stressed about it. But the Omnibus bill and the new legislation changes. Most of you would be aware, in fact, we did run a webinar specifically on it a few months ago with Hayley Mitchell, that there are some major changes coming into our legislation. Originally, those changes were meant to come into effect this year, but due to COVID, they were put back. Also this year, though, however, and due to COVID, they introduced the Omnibus bill. Now, this bill was brought in to help deal with the insanely changing climate that we were facing due to the COVID-19, and that was changing every single day. It brought in some of the changes that you're aware of, such as not being able to evict a tenant under hardship, no rent increases, the new processes for tenants vacating if owners need the property back, all those sorts of things that we've been dealing with, and of course, many more. We have learnt to adapt with these changes pretty well. Our team and our tenants and you have handled them incredibly well. However, the government has decided, in its wisdom, that the Omnibus bill will finish the exact same day as the new legislation changes will come in. This, from our opinion, and it is our opinion, and I believe a large part of the industry, is really very harsh to our landlords. And it is going to cause some potential real issues for you as a landlord, and certainly there's going to be a bit of a hole that it creates that we want to talk to you about. And that's simply because there's no time between our current legislation, which has already been restricted with the Omnibus bill, and the new legislation changes coming in. Now, in the time that we have tonight, we're probably not going to be able to cover all of it. So, Kirst, I'll get you to unmic. Let's get cracking and have a chat about some of the obvious ones. And firstly, the one I want to talk to you about is the 120 days notice to vacate. This is a biggie. Can you sort of talk to our landlords about this?
Yeah, it is a really big issue. So in the past, we've been able to issue a notice to vacate for 120 days, no reason. And during the Omnibus bill, that was taken away from us and our landlords to issue that. So we were hoping it would come back in during the gap between, as Pete was just saying, between the Omnibus finishing and the new legislation coming into effect. So what happens now is that the new legislation doesn't allow for this notice to be issued either. So it's pretty much gone straight away. So we haven't been able to use it for the last few months during COVID, and we won't be able to use it moving forward. So it does pose a really big issue. We have a lot of our landlords wanting to sell or move back into a property. So for them to be able to issue a notice to vacate without giving a reason, just to end the tenancy, has been a really valuable tool. So now we do have to have a reason, and that is owner to occupy, property to be sold, owner renovating. So it does certainly have a large effect on everyone who's wanting to end a tenancy without necessarily having one of those reasons.
And Kirst, so I guess landlords, to clarify, that 120 days notice to vacate for no particular reason, it's not allowed in Omnibus bill, and it's not allowed in the new legislation, which means as of now, that option is off the cards. And it has been a greatly used one. Now, I've got to be a little bit careful here because, of course, it is 120 days notice to vacate for no reason. But there are good circumstances in when that is used, and it's a notice that's been very heavily relied upon. And so, as Kirst was just explaining, it's going to mean that the reasons for which you can give notice to vacate are going to be drastically reduced. Anything else we need to touch on that? I think that kind of covers that off, doesn't it, for the moment?
It does, yes.
All right, so our second point that we probably wanted to cover, guys, that is the end of a fixed term tenancy. And that kind of leads into that really nicely. So remind our landlords around this end of fixed term tenancy, Kirst. And I don't want to go into too much detail because we did cover it, but this is going to be a biggie as well.
It is. So with the new legislation changes, you can only issue an end of fixed term tenancy notice for the first lease. So after that, that opportunity is taken away. I guess so having the 120-day notice to vacate removed as well means that you, after that first lease, you are without the option of having a tenant vacate without a reason.
So guys, just to kind of explain that, you approve a new tenant, they sign a 12-month tenancy. As that tenancy is coming to an end, you will have the right to end that tenancy, Kirst, that's right, on the basis that that lease is coming to an end. But, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kirsty, if the tenant then says, I'd like to stay on, and you go, terrific, we're happy with that, and you extend that lease for another 12 months, you will no longer have the right to finish it at the end of that new lease or that second lease or even the third lease. It is now on the tenants to end that lease, other than the other options that you may have in due to, wanting to sell or, not paying, or we can't even do that if they're under lease, but if we give them issues over not paying rent and so forth.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess we're very strict on our tenant selection at the start of every tenancy, and that just becomes even more important coming into the new legislation changes, because you'll only have that first 12-month lease to decide if you want that tenant to continue on or whether you're actually wanting to have them vacate and start the process again.
And it's a difficult one, Kirst, isn't it? Because I know, sometimes you've got a great tenant, but, things are not quite maybe working out the way you want. And it is sometimes nice to extend it for another 12 months, but have the opportunity to, stay on, or give it another 12 months before you decide. But that won't happen. You will literally only be able to decide that at that 12 months. Then it will be on that particular tenant, whether they move out at the end of the next terms.
Yeah, that's right. So it does only give you that one opportunity to make that decision as to whether you want the tenant to continue on or not. So I think it will stop a lot of landlords from giving those tenants, I guess, a second chance like they normally would if there was an issue with, I guess, rent arrears or how they're keeping the property. I think that will make the decision, that bit harder for our landlords.
Just while we're on it, there has been a question coming, Kirst. What if the tenant stays on a month by month after that 12 months?
Yeah, so it's exactly the same as if they were to sign on for another lease. That opportunity is gone, so it's only available for that first lease. So I guess after that, I think the new legislation is saying that you've had 12 months as an opportunity to get to know the tenant and see how they're living in the property and see how they're paying their rent. And after that, they take that opportunity away and you can only issue a notice to vacate for the reasons we mentioned earlier.
All right, so that is going to be a bit of a big one for us to get our heads around, landlords. And sadly, there's no real relay into this as to how this will all pan out. It is going to be a learning process for both the industry and VCAT. So it's going to take a little bit of working around. Thirdly, and again, we've covered this in the legislation webinar we did. So if anyone needs that again, let us know. We can send you the link to it. It is on our YouTube channel. But we're getting a lot of questions around gas and electric compliance. Now, again, we covered it, I guess, but Kirst, let's just talk about one, what's been spoken about, and two, what we're doing as a company to address that.
So at the moment, we're speaking to our plumbers and electricians about a plan moving forward for when the legislation does change. So at the moment, they're saying the requirement will be for a gas check and electrical check every 2 years. But we are waiting to find out exactly what that will involve and what will be required for compliance. But we have started speaking to some tradespeople just to get pricing and an idea on how that will work. And then once we have further guidelines as to what's required, we can fine tune that and send out some information.
So I guess, guys, we're hoping that we'll be able to set up a process very similar to your smoke alarms and carbon dioxide, where we've got some preferred suppliers that we've vetted and checked that can be available to you, and get that on an ongoing basis. But for those of you who are already trying to make some provisions for it, just stop, pump the brakes would be the advice, Kirst, and let's wait and see exactly what the rules and the guidelines are around that before we set up any real provisions and systems around it. And so that's what we'll do. We are on top of it. We're watching and we're listening. And once we've got all the exact rules around it, we'll be sure to get that out. And chances are we'll probably, I would suggest, run one of these and maybe even get a couple of experts on to talk to you all. All right, so VCAT. Let's have a quick chat about VCAT. Now, this has been the topic every time I come past our property management space. Every chat room I sit in, this is all that property managers are talking about, which is not normally a good thing for you landlords, but we do want to just address it because it is a bit of a concern. Kirst, firstly, let's just give a bit of summary on what's happening. There is an insane backlog at VCAT, isn't there?
Yeah, there is a huge backlog. So there's thousands of cases that haven't been scheduled to be heard as yet. They're working on around 100 cases a day, but they just cannot catch up. And I think the main reason for this is because we now have to make 2 applications to have a tenant vacate a property. So in the past, a notice to vacate would be sent out, and then we would make an application if that tenant doesn't move out. And now we have to actually apply to VCAT for a hearing just to determine if the tenant does need to move. So I think that's definitely causing a backlog, having 2 cases for every one that we would have done in the past.
There is a bit of fear, guys, that there's physically just, unless there's more money thrown at this by the government, there is just possibly no way of getting through the backlog that is there at the moment. We're not 100% privy on exactly how much the backlog is, but we've got a pretty good indication. So we're probably just warning some of our landlords to be aware that there is a chance that we may have to restart some of these applications because there's a gut feeling that they just won't get through them and they'll get lost in the river and start it again. So compensation cases, Kirst, they're not hearing the cases until they're actually back in person. Is that right?
No, that's right. So all of our other cases at the moment are being done over the phone with the VCAT member and also the tenant involved in the case. And they've notified us that any compensation claims aren't going to be heard until we're back, I guess, in court with the tenant, because obviously there's so much more paperwork for a compensation claim and it's just taking up too much time for them in their backlog. So we have a case that goes back to March that still hasn't been heard, so very frustrating for our landlords.
And you and I have spoken about this and the unpredictability of the outcomes at VCAT. Do you want to... There were some examples we were talking about before. I don't know that you can actually give a reason and a why, and we certainly don't want to upset VCAT in case someone sees this video, but do you want to maybe share some examples of what we've seen going on?
Yeah, so recently, I guess one of the best examples is an owner to occupy notice to vacate, an application that we made. So the first hearing was just to determine whether or not that tenant did have to vacate so the owner could move back in. The owner needed to move back into their home ready for the school year next year, gave the tenant plenty of time, and VCAT have sided with the tenant. And now the landlord has to find somewhere else to live for a month because they've given them an extra month of time. So normally, yeah, we would never see that happen. Normally it would just be a notice to vacate sent to the tenant and they would either vacate or we'd make an application then to have that heard. And if we could prove the owner was moving back in, we would be successful. So yeah, it's a massive change.
Yeah, guys, normally a landlord moving back in is a #1 priority. Now, VCAT naturally want to see some evidence that that's the reason for the vacate and it's not just being posed as the reason. But it's normally quite easy to show some good solid evidence. And in this case that we were dealing with, it was as clear as day. And in fact, there was some real strenuous circumstances behind these particular people's circumstances. And we were blown away. We were there was no justification or reason behind it. And that's the uncertainty or the real calamity that's, I guess, happening at the moment that COVID has thrown at us, that things aren't happening the way we would usually expect them to. And sadly, it's not always, well, it's not usually in favour of the landlord, is it?
No, it's not. And it's, I guess it's very unfair when an owner does need to move back into their home or wants to sell the property. It's incredibly frustrating for them when they can't get their home back. And I'm hoping that that improves once the new legislation comes back in and Omnibus finishes and we're back in person at VCAT. I'm hoping that that does go back to how it was in the past.
So to those landlords listening or that watch this video later on, because we'll email it out to the rest of the group, if you are, you do have situations where you are going to VCAT, our crew are working with this every single day. And I don't say this just because they're our crew. They are literally, they're watching the chat rooms. We've got direct communications with the REIV. The industry as a group have come together, probably the best they've ever done over this COVID situation. So we are keeping on top of it better than I think you would find most. And if there are situations arising at VCAT, we may not be able to always give you the answers. That is not because we're not equipped to handle them. There is just at the moment so many uncertainties and so many things not going necessarily the way they typically should. The date, that's a good question. Heidi, the Omnibus legislation finish and the new legislation comes in. What's the date for that?
So the 28th of March.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Omnibus finishes and the new legislation starts, guys, on at the same time. Now, guys, look, there was another little query there. I'm not sure if I quite got it there, but Kirsty, let's just talk it quickly because I haven't seen any questions yet. Notice to vacate moving forward in the new legislation. I'm throwing you a curveball here, but what are the options our landlords are going to have in terms of issuing a notice to vacate to tenants?
So we'll have the end of fixed term tenancy for that first lease, as we discussed. We'll have notice to vacate property sold, property to be sold, owner to occupy or owner's family to occupy, renovations. And then we'll also still have our breach notices as well. So if a tenant is in breach of duty of their tenancy and we go through that process and that ends up at a notice to vacate, that will still be available as well.
So I guess that's the good news, and we don't want to send out too much alarm here. If a tenant is doing the wrong thing, if they're not paying their rent, we can still breach them. We can still evict them on those bases or any of the other usual reasons that you can evict a tenant for a notice of breach. It's more those in-between circumstances, Kirst, isn't it? It's when they're going along okay, but we're not 100% happy. It's time to change. Those reasons are going to be taken out of your hands.
Yeah, that's right.
Robin has just put a question up here. I heard it is 6 months before it can be relet. I have a funny feeling, Kirst, what Robin's saying there is that if you gave notice to vacate for the purpose of selling, Robin, you're welcome to type something in there, but I think that's what you're saying. If I gave notice to vacate for the purpose of selling the property, then you would need to wait 6 months before you could put it up for let.
Yeah, so you do need to leave the property vacant. You can apply to VCAT to have that period of time reduced. So if you have evidence that you were going to renovate or you were going to sell and the circumstances changed, then we can apply to VCAT to have the property deemed to be able to be relet. So that's quite successful. You just have to have enough evidence to prove that your circumstances did actually change.
And Kirsty, what if you were doing major renovations? So you gave notice to do major renovations, you did the renovations. Is the 6 months there still relevant too?
Once again, you would need to apply to VCAT to have the term reduced that it needs to be vacant for. So if the renovations finished earlier, you would be able to provide that evidence that we actually did do the kitchen renovation and the bathroom renovation, but the property is now available to be relet, and we would just apply to have that term reduced.
And again, guys, we're only assuming here, but we're hoping the common sense rule applies as it has previously, and that is that when you can provide sufficient evidence, not a problem, Robin, but when you can provide sufficient evidence that your reason was legitimate. So if you can show invoices of a new kitchen and painting and so forth, that has all been done with correct date stamps, VCAT should be pretty quick in turning that around. But where they smell a mole or a rat, where they feel that it's been used just to get the tenant out, they are very unkind. It's not something you would want to play with. And it's probably something to be aware of is that your tenants are very well versed in their legislation. They know it very well. They're handed a lot of information and they're given a lot of support. So for those of you thinking, well, I'll just use one of these other reasons and work around it, that's not appropriate, and you will come unstuck.
Yeah, there's definitely, I guess there's compensation that can be awarded to the tenant if you are seen to be doing the wrong thing. So if you do say you're going to move back into the property and then you don't, yeah, there'll be compensation for moving costs, first month's rent. So it's really just not worth it for the penalties that VCAT will put on landlords.
So guys, look, thank you for joining us. We've been chatting now for about 20-25 minutes. I don't want to spend too much time on that. While I wrap up, if there are any questions that we haven't covered, or I guess first of all, Kirsty or to our team, is there something else we want to mention to our landlords before we hang up?
The only thing I might mention is we are rolling out our new landlord information portal. So you may have already, as our landlords, you may have already seen some information come through about that. So we will be running another information session where we'll screen share with you and show you how to use it. But it just means you won't have to go through your emails to look for your statements. You'll be able to see when the lease expires, where the rent's paid up to, if there's any pending invoices. So it's definitely an exciting new tool that, yeah, that we're really interested in putting out there for you just to save you time and also have the information at your fingertips if you need to at 9 o'clock at night.
Yeah, guys, that will be, I think you will love that. It's a very simple piece of tech that attaches directly into our portal so you can get access to all your information. It's something that we've wanted to probably introduce for a while, but now that we're in our new system that's working beautifully, glad to say, that will be turned on very shortly. We just wanted to make sure we had all the information in there for you before we turned it on for you. So I think when we do that webinar, we'll probably be able to give you a live demonstration on how that all works too, Kirst, which will be great. So make sure you tune in for that because I think the majority of you will get a lot of use out of it. So guys, thank you to my panelists, you incredibly hardworking bunch. Thank you for joining us tonight. To all our landlords, please, if you do have any questions, don't just assume that what you're reading in the papers are correct. The media is getting 90% of the information wrong at the moment. Give us a call, shoot us an email. We will come back to you. The crew at the top of your screen or in the middle of your screen, however you've got your computer set up, are working incredibly tirelessly and hard to make sure they stay on top of everything. So thank you very much for tuning in. We can't wait to get back to actually having you maybe we might try and do a live, not a webinar. We might try and do a live seminar at some point just to say hello and meet you all very soon. But until then, please keep staying positive out there, test negative, and we will see you all again very soon. Cheers, guys. Have a good night.